And hello, New Zealand. Welcome back. We've got another political playback. And once again, my special guest is Simon O'Connor. I think it's a part of our contract, isn't it, Simon? We just have to do this together.
That's right. It's an obligation on both of us, contractually locked in. You can't get out of it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all good. No, I'm happy about that. Now, just one request, Gordon. Could you just email me the link for getting the comments? Because I'm on a new location, which, as you can tell, I'm directly outside the beehive. And you're just outside Parliament, Simon. So that's good. Everything's gone to plan. Okay, I've got it right there. I'll have to type that in. Okay, let's get straight into the topics. We've got a lot of topics to talk about, and the first one I'm a little bit worried about because there is a move to extend Parliament to 4 years from 3 years. Now, actually, I'm not quite sure. Apparently, this is all part of the coalition agreement, and we're actually going to have a referendum on it. Is that the case, Simon?
Yeah, I believe so. It's funny, I haven't followed this in depth, although what I do know, everything you've just said sounds true. The other element is that actually all the political parties, the major political parties agree. So Labour as well is on board with this. But what I think we might see happen, though, is the public reject it. In other words, the politicians will want this. I'm not quite sure the public are going to be convinced.
So are you? Do you think governments need 4 years rather than three? Because I mean, in the UK, you've got five. What's Australia? They're four, aren't they?
Yeah, look, it's been lovely chatting with you, Bob. No. I've spoken into this before. I probably do lean into 4 years. I think three does go by very, very fast. And I understand a lot of the arguments from people outside who say, well, look, it's the only way to hold people accountable. And I understand that. But for me, having been on the inside, both in government and opposition, another year would probably make a bit of a difference to actually implement what a government's voted in for.
Right. Because as far as I'm concerned, I would never go near 4 years because I just think we could have had 12 years of Helen Clark and we could have had 8 years of Jacinda Ardern. So that just freaks me out a little bit. And the other problem I have is that I would only vote because it's going to go to referendum, isn't it? There's going to be a public referendum on this one. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. And look, I think it'll fail, actually. The public doesn't tend to vote in support of things that MPs want. Remember first past the post versus MMP. The politicians of the time were very much, let's just stick with what we've got. And the public gave them the giant middle finger. And so I suspect this will happen here as well. So it's a distraction, to be honest. It'll be a lot of time and money. I don't think it's going to bring about the change that the Parliament's thinking it will.
Okay, I have got the comments coming through, and they are coming through thick and fast. I was just going to add, thank you, Gordon. I was just going to add that I would only consider 4 years if there was some form of accountability, which for me would be a binding referendum type of option. I do like is it the Swiss model? I think it's probably the benchmark is a little bit low, but when I think back to the anti-smacking law, even though that wasn't binding and it should have been, it was still a huge hurdle for us to achieve. And, credit to Larry Baldock, who led the charge and got 300,000 signatures and even got it to the vote. 87% said, look, we don't agree with Parliament. And John Key in Parliament just said, well, too bad. So I would want some type of, if we're not going to have an upper house, then I would want some accountability before we went from 3 years to 4 years. 3 years is just enough for me to cope with what they're doing. But you would probably argue that in the first year you're getting your feet under the desk, in the second year you sort of do the business, and then in the third year you're immediately into campaigning.
Yeah, you've nailed the argument, and that's sort of my fundamental point. And yeah, I absolutely get the trauma of even pondering a longer period of time with the likes of Helen Clark or Jacinda Ardern. But yeah, the window of time within the current 3 years to actually implement policy is quite small. And if I might, I'll also put on the record, Bob, I'm not a great fan of referenda, which might sound like a terrible thing to people, but more often than not in every case, but more often than not, we take very complex issues, reduce them to a rather simplistic question for a yes or no answer, and I'm not particularly convinced that's a good way to move ahead. I mean, California is a good example of lots and lots of citizen-initiated referenda. It's a mess. Switzerland, you mentioned, but even there, timely, expensive, often doesn't bring about the change which is anticipated. But that's just my take.
Yeah, we could probably have a bit of a scrap on this one because, like I do agree that the Swiss model is too low. The benchmark is too low to trigger. They trigger too many referendum. But for every referendum that people say have been a problem, I still sometimes believe in the common sense and goodwill of the general public more than I do the elected officials at times. And I know that some people say, well, look what happened with the euthanasia referendum. But on the other hand, I could say, well, look what happened with the cannabis referendum. If we had left that up to the politicians, I suspect, and you were in the House at the time when that was all happening, I think they would have had the numbers in the House to actually legalise cannabis. And we stopped them because we had a referendum. So, yeah, there's arguments both ways, isn't there?
Oh, there certainly is. I'd be clear, I'm not saying no to referendum or referenda. Sorry, I better get my declension correct. I'm not saying that we never have referenda. I think there are times and places for them, but I wouldn't want to see it expanded too much. I think at day's end, and I might sound like, a turkey doesn't want to vote for Christmas, but, we vote politicians in to represent us, to sit in that parliament, to debate and discuss and get into it in depth, and then make a decision on our behalf, our representative behalf. If we start having a lot of citizen-initiated referendums, and there's even been like citizen ceremony, there's some other sort of discussion of pulling together hundreds of citizens to discuss and debate. It's like, well, what's the point of the parliament? Yeah, that's sort of, but again, it's not that we should never have referenda. I just don't want to see it expand too far.
Do you think we should have an upper house or some additional level of... No? Okay.
No. God, no.
You don't like the Australian system?
No. Look, for all the faults that New Zealand's system has, I don't see an upper house of another 50 or 100 people working. I just think that's even more politicians, highly paid. It'll grind things down process-wise. And I genuinely worry, Bob, that it will become a little bit like Fiji. We'll end up with effectively a great council of chiefs. I think the big argument will be made that this should be part of that co-governance and partnership in inverted commas. So you'll end up with a lot of sort of tribal chiefs and others. And I think it's just like Fiji, a road to disaster. So I just don't... I don't think it's quite necessary. I understand the constitutional safeguard it brings. But yeah, if we were to implement an upper house, we're not going to have lords and the bishops like you've got in the UK. You got to ask yourself who's going to be on it. And let's put it really basically, it won't be you and I.
No. And it won't be Candace Owens. We'll come back to that in a moment. Okay.
Lord McCoskrie of Auckland.
Yeah, that sounds nice. I like it. Look, heaps of comments coming through. Let me just grab a few of them. Anne-Marie says, make it a 10-year term, then the government and the people can think more long-term. Oh boy, that would be interesting. 10 years of some of the leaders that we've had. Kevin says, we're too small for a president or an upper house. Stephen says 4 years, but a limited number of terms. A bit like they do with the US president, can only run 2 terms. What else we got? There we go. God, it is quite hard looking at your comments at the same time as talking, isn't it, Simon? I take my hat off to you when you do solid ground now because it's just you. I can't sort of make any other comments. There's a few smart comments here as well. Kevin says the first 3 years. Yeah, go on. You'll like this one.
I just thought, well, while you're doing that, not that we're on solid ground, but you'll notice I have swapped out the mugs. We're now on the political playback mugs. Did you bring yours with you, Bob?
No, I apologise. So I will just pretend. As I said, I'm on the road. So Ian says politicians don't represent the people; they represent their own agenda. That can seem the case, and I think that's partly the problem of MMP, that you've got a lot of list MPs who are accountable to their party rather than to their constituents. Y says no for years. Kevin, no, I did that one. Rosie says no one could have coped with 8 years of Jab Cinder. We'll come back to that Jab Cinder because there was a report that came out today. That is a naughty title, though. The one from Y that I wanted was a referendum means nothing. Politicians won't listen to the people regardless. That has been the sad thing. They listen to the referendums that they start, like the flag referendum. They listen to that one, but they don't listen to the citizens-initiated referendums, even though when they introduced it, the Hansard record shows that the politicians said that they would listen to it. And our mate Henoch and Deanna are watching and says, nice to see you gents, obviously referring to me. Okay, right, let's get into our second topic, and it is 12 months on from when the coalition came together. Everybody freaked out because they thought, how can these three ragtags work together and it's just going to be complete chaos? So, I mean, before I get you to comment, I mean, if we look at the track record in the latest polling, the blue line up the top is National. It's it hasn't dived and shown this mass chaos. Sure, Labor's recovered, but it could only recover from its drubbing. The Greens are dropping a little bit, which is interesting. But the other interesting thing is that I think the coalition are doing okay because they're concentrating. Let me just enlarge this for you. The coalition are concentrating on cost of living, economy, health, law and order, education. Now, we'll come back and analyse just how well they're doing at that. But I think they're focusing on the top 5 things. You'll notice that the treaty doesn't come until the 6th, even though that's getting the most heat. So just from your observation, Simon, 12 months on, the ragtag 3 that they predicted would explode within 2 months, they've actually done quite well.
Oh, absolutely. I think they've done very, very well. I'd say it's not completely unpredictable either. And so far as I might have said it before, or I've written it somewhere, power is a quite the aphrodisiac. And what I mean by that is these guys want to stay in power. And they understand that despite being 3 different parties and philosophies and egos, the way to stay in power is to be unified. So I have no doubt there are some very robust discussions, debates, and arguments behind closed doors. There's many bruised egos and so forth. But they understand that to the public, they need to look unified or at least mostly stable. Yeah. You'll obviously have seen a few little outbursts from time to time. But the media in particular, mainstream media and the commentariat, right from the start, wanted to try and set the narrative that this was a coalition of chaos and so forth. But actually it's working quite well. On the slight not so good side is that, as you point out with the polling, they haven't really gone up or down. Now, you can read that multiple ways, but in many ways, if I can see it correctly on my screen, while there's been movements, if you were to draw the trend line, they're pretty much straight.
Same, yeah. And but for a government, isn't that a good trend line? Because generally, in opposition, you can promise everything and claim everything, but when you're in government, you've actually got to stand by your record. Actually, there's more to pick at, isn't there? And so, therefore, if you're holding the line, that's probably pretty good, isn't it?
I would say probably not. I mean, don't get me wrong, you don't want to be like Sir Keir Starmer in the UK and you sort of get elected and then start collapsing your vote.
Yes.
But no, I think I think what you'd want to see and what was expected is that the governing parties, or National at least as the main partner, should have gone up. We've talked about it before, and I still maintain this, Bob, that National should not be happy that it can't reach 40%. In other words, you'd expect it to go up, so that honeymoon period, and then as the years go on to begin declining. But I think in many ways people are exhausted politically. I don't know if it's because of COVID, the cost of living and so forth. I think if I put it in really, really crude or basic terms, people were completely over Labour. more than happy to take anyone else, and they're not completely upset with this lot. They're not thrilled. The polls tell you that.
No.
There's grumbles, but they're going, at least it's not the last lot.
Okay, now there was a poll done where they asked who's in control of the three-headed monster. Is it Seymour? Is it Winston? Or is it Luxon? I think you've seen the results of this poll, eh, Simon? I can't do a little test on you, use you as a lab rat. Okay, well, let's show the audience. So what they found was that, I mean, the media jumped on this and they said only half of the country believe that National are in control of the coalition. But you've got to look at that 23% down the bottom there who really don't know, probably because they don't care. They just want a government that functions. And so what it's showing is that probably in proportion to the number of seats, actually it's New Zealand First that's probably outpolling itself. And I would have, if I had predicted this, if you hadn't shown it to me, Simon, I would have predicted that ACT would have been seen to be the ones driving the coalition because they've been getting all the media coverage with the treaty, with charter schools. It's been the lunches in schools. So David Seymour's been getting a huge amount of media, but yeah, they still think Luxon's in control. Do you think he's in control, Simon? Loaded question, yeah?
Mostly. Yeah, it is. I think mostly. I don't think it's unfair or unreasonable to say he's been outmaneuvered a number of times. He's not a seasoned politician. He doesn't know all the tricks. I mean, really, and I don't say this uncharitably, he arrived in Parliament, barely got his feet under the desk, and now he's Prime Minister. So some of the games, which be it Winston or ACT are playing, have caught him a little bit, and I suspect some of the games of his own national colleagues. But he is the one managing this. I mean, National, at the end of the day, holds the most votes. They have the most sway in Cabinet. And the other thing is, despite the protestations and noises which the minor parties like ACT and New Zealand First make, what we've seen time and time again in coalitions is that the main party ultimately attracts the most attention and support. Yeah. That's why most of these small parties actually end up disappearing in some shape or form when they're in coalition, because even though Winston and New Zealand First can put lots of stuff on social media and all the wins they've achieved, most people go, oh, what was the national government? They sort of forget about the coalition partners to a degree. So again, the poll doesn't completely surprise me.
Okay, well, Stuff has done a kind of little assessment of the cabinet ministers and how they're doing. And of course, there's cabinet ministers from National and ACT and New Zealand First. So I just will go through these quickly. And Simon, I'm just interested to know whether you think any of these marks are not deserved or are quite generous. So Christopher Luxon gets a 6 out of 10. Nicola Willis, Minister of Finance, 6 out of 10. Chris Bishop gets a 10. Is that just because he's mates with the media? How does he get 10?
Chris is... Yeah, I actually, not being uncharitable, I thought that was quite high. I mean, for me, 10 would be outstanding on all levels. I mean, he's clearly working exceptionally hard. He's balancing some pretty substantial portfolio, so I don't want to take away from any of that. He's a very competent person. But in terms of actual verifiable, tangible wins on the ground, they're not there yet. I think the others make sense, to be honest. There's been, as I say, faults by the PM. Nicola Willis is actually quite quiet. You don't see or hear much of her. There hasn't been much change. In fact, could even be generous. As I say, I think I've mentioned before, it seems to be my phrase for today, I've mentioned before, but National is spending more money than Labour. We're in more debt under National than we were with Labour. And look, it's only a year in, but that's got to change. So that's got to change if this is a truly centre-right government.
Okay, Dr. Shane Retty only gets a 3 because the health portfolio is kind of the one that nobody wants at the moment, eh?
Shane is incredibly competent. He's a lovely guy, but the health portfolio is definitely an Achilles heel for the government. There's just one bad news story after another. It's not looking too good. So to be fair, that is fair.
Okay, just quickly, Simeon Brown gets an 8. I think he's done... The fact he's got rid of road cones and he's put speed limits back up, I'd give him 12 out of 10. Erica Stanford, 9. Mark Mitchell, 8 on police, mainly. And Matt Ducey, who can't figure out that kids shouldn't have puberty blockers, is on 6. That's generous. Any there surprising for you?
Yeah, look, I don't think Ducey deserves a 6, not just because of the lack of decisions on a whole lot of things such as puberty blockers, but really what has been achieved, and the answer is
Where is
nothing.
he? Yeah.
The others I'd agree with. In fact, I'd give Simeon more. I'm slightly biased. I count Simeon as a friend, but if there's one minister who's actually regularly doing things verifiably, it's him. It's him.
Yeah.
Also, I like his scrappy nature. He takes the fight to these lefties.
Yeah, no, he's done very well. Okay, New Zealand First that are in the cabinet. Winston gets an 8. Shane Jones gets a 7, and Casey Costello gets a 0.5. Now that's because of it's one thing. What is it? Is she in charge of the smoking? And yeah, I mean, does she deserve a 0.5 for that? Because there's a lot of noise and a lot of huff and puff about that, but is it a problem what she's done?
Love the pun.
Thank you.
I don't think she deserves 0.5. Look, she hasn't fired. She's not. There's nothing you can really notch up against her as a big win. But the smoking stuff has been badly handled. I think, unfortunately for her, where there is smoke, there's fire. And I know that's a really bad pun, as all the viewers are watching. But
get rid of him.
It's shocking. But actually, boo. So there's problems, but I think 0.5 is just sort of, again, the media continuing just to put the pressure on. I don't think that's true. I mean, maybe it's 2 or 3, but yeah, that has been nasty.
Okay, and so Winston was 8, remember that. David Seymour got a 7. Brooke Van Velden got a 6. I mean, Brooke Van who? I mean, where is she? And Nicole McKee, of course, scores a 3, and that's because all around the gun lobby and all that noise, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is where you begin to see the bias of the media kicking in. They don't like Seymour so much, probably around the treaty principle stuff. I said most of the other ministers, I mean, what are they doing that actually gives them any value? But they clearly liked or not liked. I think Nicole's a good example of someone that they don't like her view on guns, but actually I think she's held and stood her ground really strongly. But again, as I say, the bias is kicking in because really, I'd even make this of Seymour. What's he actually done? He set up a whole new bureaucracy, which I still haven't worked out what it's doing.
Well, just laughing because Christopher Luxon got 6, Winston got 8, and Seymour got 7. So in terms of the battle of the leaders, Winston was doing best, and he's been overseas more than any of them. Anyway, okay, let's move on to the. Actually, we were just. We did do that. Yep, we are up to the ACT finally getting it, and it's because of this post that was put out as a result of the puberty blockers review that we covered in detail last year, including a breaking news special edition on it, and it basically said that the research simply wasn't there to merit the safety and the efficacy of puberty blockers. And in fact, they couldn't say whether the risk was low if people were taking it. I mean, why are we allowing children to have this is the massive question. But ACT came out with what we would call a tone-deaf post because they said we should support young people to love themselves, not change themselves with experimental medication. This is the party that voted unanimously for the conversion therapy law, which means that a parent is criminalised for pushing back on a child who wants to go down the gender affirmation model with preferred pronouns, with puberty blockers, with name changes and chest binders. And here's ACT suddenly saying, oh, whoops, we need to look after kids. Well, if they want to look after kids, stop criminalising counsellors and pastors and parents who want to look after the kids as well. So tone deafness, in my view. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's tone deaf, but it's also cheap politics. They're hoping that everyone will forget their previous and their current voting record. So you're completely correct. They all voted against conversion therapy. In fact, only 8 of us out of 120 voted against that law. And this is going to sound a bit self-indulgent, but I think we're already seeing that we were right to be against it. If you've read the likes of the Cass report and this review even that's come out from New Zealand's Ministry of Health. So look, ACT's just seen a cheap, easy opportunity to try and look like they're on the right side of this. They're hoping, Bob, that you and I and all our viewers will forget. We haven't. And by the way, it's the ACT Party which is continuing to push the manipulation and falsification of birth certificates, that you don't have to actually declare mothers and fathers. It's basically just progenitors and all sorts of things. So look, they're just hoping we'll forget where they truly sit on this. But we've got bad news for them. We at Family First and our tens of thousands of supporters aren't that silly.
Yeah. Okay, Rosie says Shane Retty deserves a higher mark, like a 7 or an 8. The nation is funding more cancer drugs than Labour ever did. Amanda says, Te Pāti Māori think that they're in control. I just had to read this because I just love the name of the guy. The love of God constraineth us. That's their name on YouTube. So I'm not sure of the gender, but it says, get away from the left and right-wing nonsense. They are wings of the same bird. If we can't see this now, we are blinded by the propaganda. And Ben Wooding says the Three Musketeers, which is probably true as well. Right, topic number 4.
Which one's D'Artagnan?
Topic number 4, and this came out today, lessons from COVID-19 to prepare us for a future pandemic. And one of the big stories was that the report says that the vaccine mandates have undeniably eroded trust and harmed some New Zealanders. Not surprising. I know you've had a quick squiz at the report, Simon, because you had nothing to do this afternoon. It's only 700 pages. Yeah. So you've memorised it and you're going to report it to the staff on Tuesday. Was there any takeaways from you?
Yeah, on page 521. No, look, I actually think this is, by and large, actually a surprisingly good report at my first glance. To be quite truthful, I haven't been able to read it all. I'm skimming at speed. But look, there was a lot of concern that the chair of the committee, so the picture you just had of Tony Blakely, Professor Tony Blakely, very close to Jacinda Ardern, that it would be a bit of a whitewash. Even though it's couched in very diplomatic language, I think actually for a lot of New Zealanders, particularly those who have been very much affected by what happened, by the management of COVID, will feel quite vindicated. He's been clear that talking to a wide range of Kiwis, including those who opposed the likes of mandates, that they were calm and reasonable and had really good points. He's clear that Jacinda and friends overreached with their 1 p.m. Podiums of truth, that was very unhelpful, that actually the widespread mandatory vaccinations and rules were not necessary. He would stress, if I've read it correctly, Bob, that there are instances where mandates do make sense, but the widespread, ongoing, everyone affected was far too draconian. And probably the last point is he realises, or has noted, that really the social cohesion in New Zealand has been damaged not by COVID. It's a really important distinction. That viruses don't do this or whatever it is. Should get that right. But anyway, COVID doesn't harm us. The way it was managed has caused a lot of damage to New Zealand.
Yeah, interesting. Just in the report, it said that Jacinda Ardern's "We are the single source of truth" comment was highlighted by many people as unhelpful and actually increased the distrust. And the other comment was just in relation to lockdowns. The report said that lockdowns in the Australian states of Victoria and New South Wales ended earlier. Victoria, yeah, I know. And they had lower vaccination coverage levels than that at which the Auckland lockdown was relaxed, without any associated increase in case numbers. So they seem to basically say that they wanted a more holistic approach, that in fact I've seen the comments that it's not just about health, but they also need to take into account education, mental health, what was the other one, employment, but I think most people were asking for that, but it just seemed to be falling on deaf ears, didn't it?
Yeah, it was. I remember myself and other, by the way, many better voices, but I remember myself arguing that, we needed a much more wider, your word, holistic approach. You can't just mandate people on a basis of health when it's going to impact their financial ability to feed their families. You got to factor this in. But unfortunately, the Ardern government just blazed on ahead with all the most sanctimony, which is unfortunately what sort of became expressed on their single source
Yeah.
of truth. So it's look, the harm, the effects is going to carry on for a long time, but maybe, just maybe, this first of this two reports will provide some, I'm not sure, I was going to say healing, Bob, but just at least people know they've been heard, but I think the
Yeah.
hurt is still very deep, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, during that time we were quite active. Just to remind people, we did the Don't Divide Us campaign, which said that don't exclude people on the basis of whether they're vaccinated or not, allow for rapid antigen testing, which there was just a complete rejection of it. We actually did full-page ads showing that it was impacting jobs well beyond the health sector, and these were all examples of people who contacted us who lost their jobs. A lot of them, like gardeners, there, ones that weren't directly connecting with people. So, 87,000 signatures were presented on that petition, and together with Christine Clark from Calandra Education Group, who was a co-sponsor with me, and there's your mate, we presented it to, who received it at the time. And interestingly, there doesn't seem to be in the report, I had a look through, we actually did a judicial review with a number of church groups across New Zealand to question why people couldn't attend church if they proved evidence of not being infectious with a rapid antigen test. Because churches were in that terrible situation of trying to deal with having to only allow vaccinated people, but they wanted the church community. And how did they? It was terrible. It caused so much friction, and the government just were not willing to accept our option of having rapid antigen test as a possible test. Now, it was kind of that arrogance that really struck home as well, and that infamous interview where Jacinda sat with the New Zealand Herald reporter and said, so there's two classes of New Zealanders, and she said, yeah, that's what it is. Very, very nonchalantly, is that the right word? And that really bugged people, didn't it?
It did. Her attitude became increasingly dictatorial and detached around the church or belief, freedom of belief. Unfortunately, the government was just very dismissive of it. I recall there was a review done. Long and short, they were meant to look at all the human rights, fundamental human rights in our Bill of Rights, but the government and its lackeys completely ignored the right of religious freedom, which in itself just indicates that they saw the idea of going to church or mosque or the temple as just completely, utterly irrelevant, rather than actually, something quite core to a lot of people. So unfortunately, Bob, very, very dismissive.
Yeah.
And also, if I might, it just shows you, for me, the absurdity of this whole separation of church and state argument, because all your progressives are always very quick, if someone from the church or you and I are giving an opinion, keep the church out of the state. Just remember, during COVID, the state imposed itself on the church more rigorously than many other organisations, as I've said before. And I spoke about it in the House. You could go to restaurants and brothels and bars, but you couldn't go to church. And just for clarity to viewers, I was not going to all those places.
Okay, thank you for clarifying
But, it's
that.
just
Right.
absurd. Yeah, we better clarify that before I get into trouble.
Yeah, disclaimer. I'll put it on the screen along the bottom. Okay, look, speaking of censorship, someone has been censored. Apparently a black woman has been banned from coming to New Zealand. I mean, I thought black and woman was the ultimate intersectionality, and her victimhood would immediately get her accepted into New Zealand. But the problem is she's a conservative. And look, I think I would just like to say, I listened to her podcasts. I think she has some whack ideas. I don't agree with her totally. But then again, I'm sure there's lots of people who think you and I have whack, well, you more, Simon, of course, have whack ideas, and yet they may agree with us on the whole. So, Candace Owens, I mean, Immigration New Zealand seems to have done it purely on the basis that Australia banned her, so we might as well ban her. I mean, who's running the ship here?
Yeah, I mean it's ridiculous. I mean, if the law literally says that New Zealand has to follow other jurisdictions like Australia, then the law is stupid and needs to be changed. But you can't help but think this is simply that the faceless bureaucrats of Immigration New Zealand do not like her political views,
Yep.
and have basically censored her. It's absolutely wrong and appalling that she's been denied a visa to come here. You don't have to agree with her views. I'm like you, Bob. There's elements of what she talks about, the Holocaust denial, for example, which I
Yeah.
am very unhappy with. But she has, and look, the Jewish community, for example, have been clear about that. They don't like her views; they find them abhorrent. But many of them are saying that she still has the right to be here. I mean, at the end of the day, she is not some fiery preacher inciting violence. She's just someone here who has a range of views, some that are controversial, and she's been banned. So this should be
Yeah.
of great concern to all New Zealanders.
Yeah. Okay. Now, interesting story featured by Radio New Zealand, actually. And I'm surprised that the media wanted to admit this, but it is entitled "The Smack: How a Family's Plea to Oranga Tamariki for Help with Their Son Unraveled." Did you actually read the details of this, Simon?
I did. I mean, it's a pretty. I mean, you're more over it than I am, but I thought it was just a pretty shocking case. It's what you'd argue is fundamentalism, which by that I mean, in this case, Oranga Tamariki took one part of the truth, which was that actually the parents did smack the child, but ignored about the other 100 factors, including that the
Yeah.
child was poisoning rabbits and they were worried about other things. So, I mean, feel free to elaborate, but it's a shocking story.
Well, I think they were dealing with a child that was just 8 years old and was poisoning rabbits, or putting rat poison in the rabbits' water and food, um, contaminating the family's food stores with pig swill, tampering with his baby's brother formula and bottle, and cutting electrical wires in the family car. And then he started sneaking out at night to light fires. So their GP referred the child and the parents to the local child and youth mental health services for an assessment. And the child's counsellor was so concerned that they sent a report about the family safety to Oranga Tamariki. But then it was revealed that on one particular occasion, and it was actually where um they were lighting a fire with wood, and he refused to do it. The boy refused to do something, refused to put stuff on the wood, and she gave him a smack. She said, "I was so sleep deprived and so desperate, I wasn't thinking straight." She immediately regretted it. She apologized to her son, and Oranga Tamariki found out about it, and that was all they zeroed in on. That's all they focused on. It was actually one of the statements that was made by child advocate Bevadir, who you know, when we were campaigning against this law, and she said what Oranga Tamariki will do is they'll go for the easy cases because they're easy to solve, but the Kahui twins, they won't know how to deal with it. They'll turn a blind eye, and of course we've seen so many other cases where they haven't done the job they're supposed to. So actually, Simon, what amazes me is that Radio New Zealand have actually followed through the story. I thought they'd probably say, "Good job, those parents should be put in jail."
I think it's just a sign. So I'm with you, actually. I was surprised that they did, but I think it's illustrative of just how horrific this story is in the entire context of what happened. So, when you look at everything that the family's going through, including the 8-year-old, their behaviour, the smack is just seen as a minor part of the entire equation. Yet, as you pointed out, it became the obsessive focus of Oranga Tamariki. But we know it's a very dysfunctional organisation. Not each and every person, I know different ones who work there, some amazing people, but as an organisation, incredibly dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And then that links back to a dysfunctional law, which is the smacking law. And you know, again, that better than anyone.
Okay, we need to just jump a couple of topics, and I do just want to talk about the New Zealand Herald, who did an editorial, and it was about Mark Mitchell. and it was basically talking about the fact that he's put frontline police in the Auckland CBD, and guess what? Crime rate's gone down. Who would have thought? Interestingly, they didn't interview the MP for Auckland CBD, which of course is media's good friend, Chloe Schwarbrick from the Greens. I think she was over at the COP conference, actually. She flew over there on one of those carbon footprint planes, if I remember rightly. But anyway, the key thing about this editorial is not the fact that it's having a go at a Minister of the Crown, because you'd expect that, but it just made this comment about complaints where people were concerned that the police were showing some political, not political independence in helping do the banners for the protest at Parliament. Now, I just want to assure you, Simon, that the police have never helped us with the Choose Life or March for Life banners for the March for Life, which, by the way, is happening in 2 Saturdays' time. But here's what the New Zealand Herald said about people who complained about the fact that the police should maintain their political independence. That it's important that they're not seen as biased. The New Zealand Herald said, but then complaints from anti-Hikoi people about police officers' impartiality raised their ugly racist heads. Well, are children writing the editorial at the New Zealand Herald now, or is it a bunch of spoilt left-wing brats, or both?
All of the above. I mean, look, a disgraceful editorial by the Herald. I mean, look, fundamentally they're allowed their opinion, but you and I have talked about this, we've written about this, that the media is so biased, so complicit with the progressive agenda, that they cannot see how out of step they are with the general public. And just like what's happening in America with MSNBC or CNN and others, they're imploding. It's because of statements like that and the arrogance within it. We expect our police to be politically neutral. And you've nailed it. We don't expect them to turn up to March for Life and be waving banners and signs. We would never ask it of them. In fact, if they started doing it, I'd probably be saying, hey guys, this probably isn't the right thing to do. And the same applies to the Hikoi. And I'd add to, they shouldn't be wearing pride flags. They shouldn't be wearing pro-Palestinian badges. The police have become politicised, and it's also one of the reasons why trust in them is breaking down. And editorials like that are exactly why the media is failing. And we now know that not only is NZME failing, Stuff is struggling. TV1, of course, is sacking people. The Spin-Off is sacking people. North and South has stopped publishing. I mean, do the media not see what's happening to them? The answer is they don't. They're too arrogant.
Yeah. Okay, look, we're just about out of time. Let's just quickly have a look at the Substacks. Healthy Pulse, who put that in? Yeah, there we go, Substack, thank you.
James has taken over. He wants a shout out.
Yeah, you should watch the latest edition of Pulse Point. James has got some very good stories on that. That's just been posted today. Let's just do a quick review. Basically, we're just blowing our own trumpets about what we've written on Substack. And you've been writing about Montreal. I mean, there's been nothing about Montreal in the media. What's going on? Has something been happening, Simon?
I was just pointing out to people that, be careful of what the media do not tell you. And so about a week ago, there were very significant violent riots in Montreal, in Canada. Police attacked, cars burned, shops. I mean, it's terrible violence by pro-Palestinian, anti-capitalist, anti-NATO, anarchists and so forth, the usual suspects. So I was just pointing out, remarkable that not a whisper about this, because it probably doesn't suit the mainstream media narrative. And then I went on to talk about sports people, but I think you've written more substantially on that, so I'll defer to you.
Well, I will get your opinion, but yeah, I did talk about the when can a sports person speak? In other words, when can they express their opinion? The media and the leftist elite loved TJ Perenara when he did the haka and he included the Hikoi statement. They loved it when the haka was done by the Hurricanes, calling the government rednecks. But they didn't like it when Israel Folau expressed his opinion and quoted a Bible verse. And it was just basically talking about the difference between the two, the reaction. And it was very funny. I've just included some clips from one breakfast, the worst breakfast show in the world, where they trip over themselves because they actually say, no, you should be able to use your platform and you should be able to speak on social media. And if you get hammered on social media, it's because you've said something true. And I don't think they realized what they were saying, because they were thinking about TJ Perenara and the Hurricane Woman. I was applying it to Israel Folau and saying, well, hang on, if you're going to use that particular yardstick, then you're in trouble. You've just tripped over yourself. But it actually points back to the fact what we were talking about, actually, not with her, in that there's a selective morality that anything that comes from the conservative side must be shut down. You cannot express it. But if the left speak, let's praise it, it's the best thing ever, and let's welcome them into the country. And of course, that's what we saw. Is that what you said in your summary?
Look, absolutely. I mean, look, they're just hypocrites. Let's just cut to the chase. They're absolute hypocrites. And it's very much a hallmark of the progressive left, or actually just progressives in general. They are so arrogantly sure of their own positions that they're more than happy to trumpet it and then stop anyone else doing the same, but with a different view. So if Candace Owens was a far left lunatic, they would be welcoming her with delight. Had Israel Folau said the opposite of what he wrote, they would celebrate him. But the examples you've just given, including actually the police, the earlier one we talked about the police and their signs, they take a very particular position and then act as hypocrites. So let's be clear, police should not be doing signs for any protests. We should let everyone come into the country to speak with their opinion, so long as they're not inciting violence. And sports stars should just try and focus on playing sport than actually hijacking sport for their own particular causes.
Yeah. Okay, we've got 1 minute. I did see out of the corner of my eye a Substack fly out from you about an hour ago. What was that on?
Oh, that's the well, good spotting. I'm trying to compete with you, Bob. I just wrote, again, it's on the Candace Owens stuff. I just thought I would extrapolate a little bit further. And I was particularly pointing out the mental gymnastics which are required from the woke progressives who are all for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But when it comes to this black woman, Candace Owens, her politics is wrong, and therefore her identity is secondary. So they're more than happy to block her. And I just wrote a few impressions on that. But I have no doubt that you will have another Substack out soon.
I will work on it. Right, we are out of time. Thank you for that, Simon. Great show as always. And we will be back next week at 5 o'clock. So, yeah. Are you on dinner tonight? I always ask you this because it always amuses me that you're the chef.
I'm not tonight. My lovely wife is home, and I think she's taking that. My understanding is she's taking care of things. But I'll update you next week.
Oh, that's great. The kids will be pleased. I'll be able to eat with safety. Okay, anyway, thank you. And thank you for watching, everybody. We will see you same time next week. Have a great night.